Picture the finest writing paper you've ever touched. Smooth, cream white, with that slight tooth to it that makes ink flow just right. Maybe it's the paper a love letter was written on. Maybe it's the paper a barrister used to draft a will. Maybe it's the paper a schoolboy pressed his very best copperplate into on examination day, trying to make his letters perfect. Now picture where that paper came from before it was paper. It came from a rag. A dirty, worn, possibly blood-stained rag, pulled out of a gutter on a November morning by a child with no shoes and a sack over one shoulder, who got a halfpenny for it and spent that halfpenny on a cup of hot pea soup from a street vendor, because it was the only meal she was going to get before dark. That's what we're doing tonight. We're going into the part of Victorian London that made everything else possible and got absolutely nothing in return for it. We're going into the waste trade, the boneyards and the rag shops and the tanneries that smelled so bad they were banned from operating inside the city walls. We're going down into the sewers, because yes, tonight we're going into the sewers, and I'm sorry about that, but you need to understand what a tosher was, and why a man would spend his working life knee-deep in London's filth looking for pennies. Picture a city of 3 million people. 3 million people eating, sleeping, wearing clothes, burning coal, drinking gin, keeping dogs, dying of cholera, boiling bones for soup. 3 million people producing waste at a rate that beggars the imagination, and no council to collect it. No dust cart that reliably comes on Thursdays. No recycling programme with its coloured bins and its cheerful leaflets. Just the street, just the gutter, just whatever the rain pushed toward whatever drain happened to be in the vicinity. And in the morning, before the street sweepers arrived, before the respectable city woke up and began its respectable business, a population of thousands moving through those streets with sacks and hooks and buckets, sorting through everything that had been thrown away, finding the value in it and selling it back. The Victorians didn't waste anything. They couldn't afford to. And the people who made sure nothing went to waste were the lowest people in the city, the ones nobody looked at, the ones who ate what the city threw out, and wore what the city had discarded and lived in rooms that smelled of everything they carried. We're living it tonight. One day. One person. Everything they would have touched and smelled and feared and survived. So I make these history stories, and I genuinely cannot tell whether you're listening to this at 11 at night. Because you find Victorian sewage systems relaxing, or because you've tried everything else and nothing else works. Either way, here we are, get comfortable, pull whatever's over you a little tighter. You're going to want to be warm for this one because the character we're following tonight is almost never warm. Here we go. Your eyes open before the alarm. There is no alarm. There has never been an alarm. The alarm is the light, or the lack of it, or the noise from the court below your window, or the baby 2 rooms over that has been screaming since approximately midnight and has not yet found a reason to stop. The alarm is your own body, which has learned over years to wake when the sky shifts from black to something darker than black, but not quite dark anymore, that transitional moment before even the coal smoke acknowledges that dawn is coming. You're already dressed. That's the first thing you notice when you come fully awake. You slept in your clothes. Of course you slept in your clothes. Taking them off means putting them back on in the morning, and that takes time. And time is the one thing you don't have. Not ever. Not in this life. Besides, the room is cold enough that your own breath has been forming small clouds in the darkness all night, and the clothes are the only thing between you and a cold so deep it makes your joints ache. The smell in the room is something you stopped noticing months ago. Yourself first, because you can't quite scrub everything out of skin and hair no matter how often you try, and you don't try as often as you should because water costs money and time and effort. The room itself, 6 people sleep here, or something close to 6. The number shifts depending on who's been evicted from somewhere else and needs a corner. And 6 people in a room this size produce a particular atmosphere that sits in the throat like something that isn't quite breathable but isn't quite unbreathable either. Old wood, tallow candle stubs, the sack in the corner that you haven't emptied yet because the rag merchant wasn't buying yesterday and you were hoping for better prices tomorrow. The sack is the worst of the smell. The sack is always the worst of the smell, but you'll get to that. You sit up. The straw mattress shifts and crackles under you. It's thin enough that you can feel every board underneath it, and 3 of those boards have a particular pattern of knots and gaps that have printed themselves into your back and hips so thoroughly that you could describe them from memory with your eyes closed. The court outside your single window is already moving. 3 stories down, the sound of it comes up through the glass that isn't really glass anymore. That's been broken so many times and patched with oilcloth and cardboard, and one piece of real glass that doesn't quite fit the frame. So the wind comes in regardless, and the sound comes in regardless. Someone is arguing. 2 voices, one male, one female, rising and falling in the particular rhythm of an argument that started somewhere else and has migrated to the court, because the court is always where things end up. A dog is barking. The dog has been barking since midnight as well, keeping the baby company. A vendor is already calling something, though it's barely light enough to see, and what he's selling you can't make out yet. Just the rising falling call of it, half song, half shout, carrying through the cold air of a London November morning in 1864. You know the date because you counted. You count because if you lose track of the date, you lose track of rent day, and rent day has a way of arriving and finding you unprepared if you're not watching for it. November, the 14th day of it. You stand up. The floor is cold through your socks, which are not really socks anymore, which are more accurately described as a memory of socks. A philosophical position that 2 pieces of wool once occupied, worn through at the heel and the ball and the toe, held together mostly by optimism and the fact that you haven't had time to find better ones. You've been looking. Every pile of discarded cloth you go through, you look for something that could serve as new socks. You've been looking for 3 weeks. The right socks haven't appeared yet. You pull on your boots. The boots are better. The boots are actually decent, salvaged 8 months ago from a pile of rubbish outside a house in Islington, where someone had clearly cleared out a dead man's belongings, and the dead man had in life owned reasonable boots that were only a size too large for you. You've packed the toes with newspaper. It's fine. It works. The newspaper has to be replaced every few weeks when it compresses to nothing, but there's never a shortage of newspaper. Not in London. Your coat next. The coat is a thing of extraordinary history. A garment that has been so many coats in its long life that it no longer really resembles any of them. The original colour was dark blue, possibly, or dark green. It's hard to say now. Someone patched the left elbow with a piece of brown wool. Someone else at a later date patched the brown wool patch with a piece of canvas that might once have been part of a sail. The collar is held on by 6 different types of thread in 6 different colours, which makes it look, in certain lights, almost intentional, almost decorative. The coat is heavy. That's what matters. It's heavy and it keeps most of the wind out, and it has 4 pockets, deep ones, which is the only thing that matters in a coat. You can carry a surprising amount in 4 deep pockets, things you find, things you want to inspect more closely later, things you've already sorted and are keeping separate. Your hook goes in the large right-hand pocket. It's about 18 inches long, a piece of iron bent at the end wrapped in leather that you replaced yourself last month with a strip from an old belt. With the hook, you can move things without touching them. You can pull aside a pile of rubbish to see what's underneath, without putting your hand into something that might cut you, because cuts get infected, and infection in London in 1864 is something you take seriously in a way that is very different from how a comfortable person takes it seriously. Your sack goes over your shoulder. It's roughly the size of a large pillowcase, made from something that was once a coal sack, and before that might have been something else entirely. It smells of coal and of everything that has gone into it since the coal, which is a complex and layered smell that you have completely stopped noticing. You are ready. This is what ready looks like for a rag picker in November in London in 1864. This is your uniform, this is your toolkit. The hook, the sack, the coat with 4 pockets, the boots packed with newspaper, the socks that are losing the argument with time, and now you have to move, because every minute you stand here is a minute someone else is working your street. That's the first thing you need to understand about this life. The streets aren't yours. Nothing is yours. The entire economy of the waste trade runs on the same few hours every morning when the night's rubbish is sitting on the street waiting to be collected, and in that window every rag picker in the neighbourhood is competing for the same piles. There are rules, there are territories, there are understandings between people who've worked the same streets for years about who goes where and who touches what. These rules are not written down anywhere. They are not enforced by any authority. But they are as real as any law, more real in some ways, because breaking them has immediate and personal consequences from people who know exactly where you sleep. You learned the rules from Bess. Bess taught you most of what you know. She is not your mother, though she is old enough to be, roughly, if you do the maths loosely. She found you, or you found her, in the way that these things happen in places like this, where people collide out of shared necessity and work out a kind of arrangement. You were 12, and she needed someone who could get into smaller spaces and move faster than her joints allowed. You needed someone who knew the trade, the routes, the prices, the people. Bess is about 40. She looks about 60. This is what the waste trade does to a person. The cold and the wet and the bending and the carrying and the occasional run-in with someone territorial about their rubbish pile. Her hands are something you've thought about a lot, because they're a preview of what your hands will be if you're still doing this in another 15 years. Thick and rough and cracked at every knuckle, the cracks darkened with ingrained grime that no amount of washing has ever reached. But strong. Her hands are extraordinarily strong. She can carry a loaded sack that weighs more than some of the children on this street, and carry it for half a mile and barely show the effort. Today is a Tuesday, which means the houses on Rawlings Row will have their rubbish out early, because the private collector comes on Tuesdays for the better houses, and the housekeepers put things out the night before. This matters. The private collector won't take everything. He takes what fills his cart and leaves what doesn't, and what he leaves is fair game if you get there before the dustman, and the dustman comes at 7, and it is currently approximately 5:10. You move. The stairs in the building creak with every step, and there is nothing to be done about that. 3 of the other people in the room stir but don't wake. The baby, 2 rooms over, has finally stopped screaming. The silence from that direction is almost alarming in its totality. You push out through the door at the bottom, the door that doesn't quite close anymore because the wood has swollen in the damp and the latch has lost its grip on the catch, and you're into the court. The court is perhaps 20 feet wide, 4 stories of buildings on each side, the buildings leaning toward each other at the top as if they're tired and looking for something to lean on, so that the strip of sky visible between them is narrow and grey, and currently showing the absolute minimum of light that counts as morning. The paving stones underfoot, where there are paving stones, are slick with last night's rain. Between the stones, things you choose not to look at too closely. The court has about 30 families living in it. 30 families produce a certain amount of waste that doesn't always make it to the correct location. The man and woman are still arguing in the far corner. They're arguing in a low, fierce way now, too tired or too cold to shout, just the sustained hiss of 2 people who've run out of almost everything, including the energy for a proper volume. They don't look at you. You don't look at them. This is the social contract of the court. You pass through the arch at the end and out into the street, and the street is already working. There are 3 other people visible in the immediate vicinity, all doing some version of what you're doing. A man you know as Old Thomas is working the gutter on the far side with a long pole and a slow, methodical patience that suggests he's been here for at least half an hour. He's about 60 and has been doing this since before you were born, and he moves through the pre-dawn streets with the unhurried certainty of someone who knows exactly what they're looking for and approximately where it will be. Closer, a girl you don't know, younger than you by 3 or 4 years, is moving fast along the near side, hitting the piles quickly and efficiently, grabbing specific things with specific speed. She's good. You've seen her before, but not on this street. She's working outside her territory, or working what she thinks isn't anyone's territory, or she doesn't know whose territory this is. You watch her for a second. She takes a rag from a pile outside number 14. Number 14 belongs to Bess's side of the street, which means it belongs to you. You move toward her. She sees you coming and doesn't stop, which tells you something about her nerve. That's Bess's stretch, you say. She doesn't look up. Bess isn't here. Bess doesn't have to be here. It's still Bess's stretch. Now she looks up. She's got a sharp face, quick eyes, nose red with cold, a piece of rope for a belt. Her sack is less than a quarter full, which means she either started late or she's been pushed off other streets already this morning. A pause. The kind of pause where 2 people are calculating. She picking tonight, the girl says. Tonight and every night. Tell her I'll stay on the north side of the postbox. You hold her gaze for a moment. Then you nod. It's not an unreasonable offer. The postbox is a natural dividing point, and the north side of it is better this time of year anyway because the house on the corner has a lot of kitchen waste. And kitchen waste means bone, and bone is worth money. Stay north of the postbox, you say. Don't come south of it. She nods and goes back to working. You go to the pile outside number 14 and check what she's taken. Just the rag, and it was a poor one. Fine. You've lost nothing significant. This is the opening movement of every day. The negotiation of space. The constant calibration of territory and relationship. And the unspoken agreements that keep 100 people working the same streets without constant violence. Most days it goes smoothly. Some days it doesn't. Once, a man on Cutler Street pulled a knife over a pile of metal scraps that he claimed was his because he'd seen it first, even though it was sitting outside a house that wasn't anywhere near his regular route. Bess talked him down. Bess is very good at talking people down. She has a particular voice she uses for it, low and very calm, that makes the person with the knife feel, not threatened, but slightly foolish, like a child being managed by a very patient adult. It works almost every time. You've been practicing it. The knife man put it away. He took the metal. You let him take it. Bess said after, "The metal wasn't worth what getting cut would have cost. That's the calculation you learn in this life. Every confrontation has a price. Every piece of territory is worth exactly what you can defend it for and not a penny more. Now, let's talk about what you're actually doing out here before the city wakes up, because it is more complicated than it looks, and the complexity of it is what keeps thousands of people alive in a city that would otherwise have absolutely no use for them. You are a rag picker. Rag and bone, some people say, or refuse collector, or bone grubber, or pure finder, depending on exactly which part of the waste trade you work. These are different jobs. They overlap, but they're different. Understanding the difference matters because it's the difference between a shilling and 2 shillings, and the difference between eating and going to sleep hungry. Rags first, because rags are your primary stock. Any piece of cloth that is not currently being used as clothing is a rag. An old shirt worn through at the elbows, buttons gone, collar turned and turned again until the turned collar is worn through too. A piece of curtain, a strip torn from a sheet, a flour sack, a bit of canvas from something that used to be a tent or a cover or a wrapper. The rags go to the paper mills. This is the thing people don't know. Every piece of paper in England in 1864 that is not cheap machine-made stuff is made from cotton rags. Real paper, writing paper, the paper books are printed on, the paper the Times is printed on starts as cotton fibre. Old linen, old cotton, old canvas. It's sorted by type and colour at the rag merchant's yard, and the sorted rags go to mills where they're soaked and beaten and processed into pulp, and eventually become the paper on which polite society writes its letters and keeps its accounts, and produces its literature. So the letter your solicitor writes to his client, the pages of the novel a lady is reading by the fire in her drawing room, the invoice from a draper's shop, all of it started somewhere like this, in a gutter, in a pile of rubbish, in the hands of someone doing exactly what you're doing right now. The white rags are worth most. White cotton, clean or near clean. A stone of it, £14, will get you something between a shilling and 2 shillings, depending on quality and who's buying. Coloured rags are worth less. Mixed rags less still. And the very worst of it, the stuff that's so worn and rotted it can barely hold together, that goes for so little per stone that you'd need a cartload to make it worth the trip to the yard. You learn to look for white. You learn to feel the difference between cotton and wool, between linen and canvas, between a rag that's worth picking up and a rag that will barely cover the cost of carrying it. You do this by touch, mostly. Your fingers know the difference between cloth that has structural integrity and cloth that will turn to powder the moment stress is applied to it. Your fingers know the difference between cotton and wool faster than your eyes do. Your fingers are doing their own thinking when they go through a pile. Bones next. Any bone that isn't currently attached to something living. Mutton bones from Sunday's dinner. Beef shin from a pot that's been boiled down to nothing. Fish bones, though they're worth less. The picked clean skeletons of whatever the city has eaten. The bones go to the bone boilers mostly, or the gelatine factories, or the fertilizer makers. Bone black, the powdered char from burnt bone, goes into the sugar refinery, if you can believe it, to decolorize sugar. So the white sugar in your tea, if you have tea, if you have sugar, passed through a filter made from burnt bone. The world is more connected than it appears. This is one of the things you learn in the waste trade. You're the thread that connects a ruined shirt in a gutter in 7 dials to the paper that a schoolmaster uses to set his pupils' exercises. You are the thread that connects a dinner table's leftovers to the sugar that sweetens the tea that the same family drinks the next morning. You move through the city's spaces, and you make these connections, and you get paid very little for it, and nobody thinks about you at all. Metals, if you find them, broken iron hinges, copper wire, old nails pulled from bits of demolished building, anything that isn't wood or cloth or organic matter. Metal goes to the scrap dealers, and the scrap dealers sell it onto the foundries, and the foundries make new things from it. Glass sometimes, if it's clear and unbroken enough to be worth keeping. Whole bottles especially. A whole intact bottle that once held gin or medicine or blacking is worth more than a broken one. The bottle manufacturers will take them back, clean them, refill them. The same bottle might be used a dozen times over the course of its life, passing through hands like yours every time it gets emptied and thrown away. Rope. Old rope, particularly old hemp rope from the docks, has multiple lives in it. It can be unravelled into oakum, the loose fibre that's used to caulk the seams of boats, which is a trade that keeps a lot of people employed in the prisons and the workhouses, people picking old rope apart fibre by fibre with bleeding fingers, or it can be used again directly if it still has enough integrity in it. And then there's pure. You carry a bucket for the pure, a separate bucket, lidded, that you keep on the other side of your body from everything else, downwind if possible, though this morning there isn't much wind, and so downwind is a theoretical rather than practical concept. The pure is dog dung. That's what the Victorians call it, pure, which might be the most remarkable piece of euphemism in a language that is full of them. The pure finders work the street specifically for this, filling their buckets by the end of the morning, selling it to the tanneries in Bermondsey where it's used in the baiting process. The stage where raw hides are soaked to make them supple before tanning. The fine gloves you might wear one day. The soft leather of a gentleman's wallet. The binding of an expensive book. All of it passed through a bath of this thing you're carrying in a lidded bucket on a cold November morning, and nobody mentions that in polite company, but it's true. The bucket is 3/4 full. You started collecting before you even got to the end of your own street, because the morning's first sortie always begins with the pure bucket, which seems backwards, but actually makes sense. You collect the pure first, when you're at the beginning of your route, and the bucket is empty and you can afford to be thorough. By the time the bucket is full, you've established your route for the day, you know which streets are yielding and which aren't, and you switch to the sack and the hook for the rest of the morning. Bess has a rule about the pure bucket. It never comes inside. It stays in the court, on the hook by the door, covered until you take it to Bermondsey. Some of the other women in the building have complained about even this arrangement, and Bess has explained very calmly that if they have an alternative means of producing income equivalent to the pure money, she'd love to hear it. And until then, the bucket stays on the hook. Nobody has yet produced an alternative. The bucket stays on the hook. The street you're working now is Rawlings Row, which is one of the better streets in the area for Tuesday morning yields, for the reason you mentioned. The private collectors come on Tuesdays, and the better houses put their rubbish out the night before. The rubbish from better houses is, predictably, better rubbish. There is a direct and consistent relationship between the quality of a house and the quality of its rubbish. Not always more of it, because wealthy people can also be careful and waste-conscious, but the quality tends to be higher. The rags from a prosperous house are more likely to be in good condition, more likely to be good cotton or fine linen, less likely to be already so worn that they disintegrate on contact. The bones from a prosperous kitchen have more meat on them. Not much more, because a cook who lets meat go to waste would not be a cook for long, but more. And sometimes, from the better houses, you find things that aren't rags or bones. Things that have been thrown away by mistake, or by a servant who didn't know the value of them, or by a household that had so many things that the loss of one went unnoticed. This is the lottery element of the waste trade. Most days it's just the steady accumulation of small weights and small values. A pound of rag here, half a pound there, bones by the handful, pure by the inch. But occasionally, maybe once a week or once a fortnight if you're having a good run, you find something worth more than the sum of its parts. A pewter mug, sold for a penny, a length of good ribbon, barely worn, probably fallen out of a workbox and swept onto the floor and then swept into the rubbish, and here it is in your pocket, worth threepence from the second-hand dealer in Short's Gardens. A book, sometimes. You can't read much more than your own name and a few common words, but Bess can read a little better, and she knows which books the dealers will take and what they'll pay. Once, an almost complete set of steel buttons still on their card, which fetched sixpence and bought both of you a decent supper. Once, and this is the story the older waste workers tell, the story that keeps everyone going, the mythological story of the trade. Once, a woman named Mary something, who worked the Bloomsbury streets in the 1840s, found a diamond ring wrapped in a handkerchief in a pile of rubbish outside a house in Russell Square. There's argument about what she actually got for it, because the story has been told many times and numbers don't survive retelling, but everyone agrees it was enough to buy a room of her own for a year and still have something left over. You think about the diamond ring sometimes when the morning is being particularly unkind. It's not that you expect to find one, it's just that the possibility exists. The rubbish of 3 million people contains multitudes, and you are one of the people positioned to find what's been lost, and every pile has the potential to be the pile that changes something. Most piles do not contain diamond rings. This morning's piles are containing the following: several lengths of cotton rag in various degrees of distress, 3 or 4 good bones that still have some selling weight to them, a broken lamp glass that you leave because it's too small to be worth carrying, a child's boot missing its mate which you take because a matched pair might appear somewhere else today or tomorrow or next week, and matches sell better than singles, a tangle of wire that goes in your pocket, a handful of what might once have been good quality paper, but has been rained on enough times that it's gone to pulp and is beyond anyone's use now, and a hat. The hat is interesting. It's sitting on top of a pile outside number 23, which is a slightly better house than most on this street. The kind of house where the front steps get swept every morning and the curtains match. The hat is a gentleman's hat, a top hat, but old. The nap is worn, particularly at the crown, and there's a tear in the brim where someone's thumb has gone through it, and the band inside is dark with sweat and age. This hat has been on a head for years. It has done its service, but it's still a hat. And hats, even old ones, even ones with tears and worn nap, can be worked. The hat trade is its own universe. There are men in this city who do nothing but buy old hats and process them. The felt can be cleaned and reblocked into a new shape. The brim can be restitched or trimmed shorter to hide the damage. A bad hat in the right hands becomes a merely mediocre hat, and a mediocre hat can be sold to someone for whom even a mediocre hat is better than no hat at all. You tuck it under your arm. You'll show Bess. She'll know what it's worth and to whom. The sky is lightening now. Not properly light yet, but the darkness has developed texture, which is the first stage of London morning. The gas lamps on the main street are still burning, small steady flames that throw yellow circles on the wet pavement. A cart is moving somewhere beyond the far end of the street, the sound of the wheels distinct on the cobbles, a rhythmic rattle that tells you it's loaded, probably a baker's cart or a coal cart beginning its rounds. Other people are appearing in the streets now, not the waste workers, who have been here for an hour already, but the first wave of regular workers, the match girls and the factory hands and the market porters, all of them moving with the particular grim purpose of people who know they need to be somewhere specific at a specific time or face consequences. There is a general flow of human movement in these streets that you have come to know so well that you can read it the way you read the rubbish piles, telling you things about the day, about the season, about what's happening in what part of the neighbourhood. The match girls move in groups of 2 or 3, fast, heads down. The match factories start early. The phosphorus fumes start early. The jaw necrosis that comes from years of breathing phosphorus fumes. You don't see that starting. You see where it ends up. When you see a woman on the street whose jaw is swollen to something terrible and wrong, and she's still going to work because what else does she do? Because there's nothing else she knows how to do. You think about this sometimes when the waste work feels very bad, that it could be worse. The fumes aren't phosphorus, the cold and the wet and the cuts and the smell are real, and they cost you real comfort and real health. But you still have your jaw. You still have both hands. There are people working in the city who will not. The bone-grubbing section of your route takes you down a narrow alley called Thrips Court, which is not officially named on any map, but which has been called Thrips Court for as long as anyone can remember. Possibly after a person named Thrip, possibly after something else. No one is certain. The alley connects 2 streets and is therefore used as a shortcut by anyone who knows it. And because it's used as a shortcut, people are always dropping things in it. Not valuable things, but things. Bits of paper, broken clay pipe stems, scraps of food that the rats and the pigs have usually got to before you, but not always. The occasional lost button or coin that's rolled into the gutter. This morning, Thrips Court contains a dead cat. The cat is on its side near the drain at the far end. It's been dead for at least a day, probably 2, and the rats have found it. You step around it carefully and look away. The smell of decomposition is one you've encountered many times, but you haven't got used to it. Not really. Not in any way that removes the physical response, the slight clench in the stomach, the impulse to move away quickly. You've learned to manage the response. You've learned to breathe through your mouth and keep moving. But getting used to it in the sense of not noticing it anymore, that hasn't happened and you've started to suspect it won't. There's a school of thought among the waste workers that the pure finders have the most objectionable work, but a competing school holds that the bone grubbers who work near the slaughterhouses have it worse, because at least dog dung is produced by animals that are alive. The bone grubbers near Smithfield deal with the overflow of the meat trade, with things that are neither properly animal nor properly meat, with the gradient between life and use that the slaughter industry moves things along every day. You're not near Smithfield today. Today you're working your regular route, which is east of the 7 Dials and south of Holborn, a grid of streets that you know as well as you know the inside of the room you sleep in. The streets have personalities. You know which ones are generous on which days. You know which households throw out useful things regularly and which ones hoard everything until nothing survives to be salvaged. You know the back doors of certain kitchens where, if you knock politely and wait, a cook might hand out bones directly. rather than putting them in the rubbish pile, because the cook has been in this neighbourhood long enough to know the bone grubbers by sight and feel a kind of transactional sympathy. The cook at number 41 on Bridwell Lane is a woman named Agnes. She's been cooking in that house for 16 years, she told you once, 16 years for the same family. And she's seen 3 of the waste workers' children born on this street and grow up and take on the route from their parents. You're not one of those. You came from elsewhere. But she treats you with the same matter-of-fact acknowledgement that she gives the others. She doesn't pity you, which you appreciate. She doesn't look at you the way some people do, with that complicated combination of discomfort and condescension. That is the middle class's characteristic expression when confronted by the poor on their own ground. Agnes looks at you and sees a transaction and a courtesy, and that's all, and you find it restful. This morning Agnes isn't at the door yet. The kitchen window is lit, yellow light spilling out into the court at the back of the house, and you can smell bread baking, the smell of it cutting through the cold air and the other smells of the morning with the directness of something genuinely good. You wait for a moment. You've learned that patience at Agnes's back door is usually rewarded. There's something almost pleasant about waiting here in the cold grey morning with the smell of bread and the sound of movement in the kitchen and the knowledge that something useful is about to happen. The door opens. Agnes is a heavy woman, red in the face from the kitchen heat, wearing an apron that is in a significantly better state than your coat. She holds out a paper-wrapped bundle without ceremony. "Mutton from Sunday," she says. "Bit of pork rin too. And there's a piece of oilcloth from a cupboard shelf if you want it." The bundle goes into your sack. The oilcloth she hands out separately. It's about a yard square, slightly stained but structurally sound. Oilcloth is useful. You can sell it, or you can use a piece of it yourself. You've been meaning to repair the gap in the window of the room where the cardboard has finally given up. "Any bottles?" you ask. Agnes goes back into the kitchen and comes out with 2. 1 gin, 1 medicine. The medicine bottle is the better of the 2. Dark glass, intact stopper. You put them carefully in the side pocket of the sack where they won't break against the bones. "2 boys from the parish came round yesterday," Agnes says, in the tone of someone sharing information they consider significant. You understand what this means. The parish authorities sometimes make rounds in the neighbourhood, supposedly assessing the condition of the poor, actually looking for people who might be claimed by the workhouse, children especially, children who appear to be unsupervised without legitimate employment, working the streets in ways that could be characterised as vagrancy. What you do is not vagrancy. What you do is work. But the line between the two is not always visible from the outside, and you are aware that certain people in authority see a child with a sack and a hook and a bucket and see vagrancy where you see a profession. "Thank you," you say. Agnes nods and shuts the door. The conversation is over. The bread smell recedes as the door closes, replaced immediately by everything else. You move on. The sack is getting heavier. This is the thing about the work that nobody tells you when you start. It's not complicated, but it is relentlessly physical. And the physical reality of it is cumulative. A pound of rag weighs a pound. 2 pounds weighs 2 pounds. By the end of a morning, your sack might weigh anywhere between 15 and 30 pounds, depending on what you've found, and you've been carrying an increasing fraction of that weight for 2 or 3 hours, and the sack doesn't hang comfortably from your shoulder the way a proper bag would. It shifts and pulls, and the rope handle cuts into the muscle above your collarbone in a way that leaves marks. You'll have red grooves there when you take the coat off tonight. You always do. Your back knows the weight differently from your shoulder. Your back feels it as a constant low pull, a pressure at the base of the spine that becomes more specific and more demanding as the morning goes on. Bess has a stoop now, a permanent forward inclination of the upper body that she didn't have when she was younger. She says she doesn't notice it. You watch her moving through the streets and you see the stoop and you understand it as a record of every loaded sack she's carried, every year's weight accumulated in the architecture of her spine. You roll your neck. The joints crack. Cold makes them crack louder, tighter, with a resistance that warmth removes. Everything in this city is harder in November. The clay in the streets freezes in the ruts left by cartwheels and becomes a field of ankle-turning obstacles. The piles of rubbish, if they've been sitting out overnight and the temperature has dropped, develop a light crust of frost that the hook has to break through. Your hands, despite the rough work of them, suffer in the cold in ways that make the rough work worse. The knuckles crack open, not just dry skin, but actual splits in the skin, at the joints that bleed slightly and sting continuously, and are very difficult to keep clean given everything your hands go into. You wrap them in the worst of winter, of strips of cloth around the knuckles and across the palms. It helps. Not enough, but something. The light is proper light now. The gas lamps are being extinguished by the lampman working his way down the far side of the main road, a figure in the grey morning with his long pole, putting out the lights one by one as the day takes over. The market stalls on the corner are setting up. A woman with cabbages, a man with coal, a vendor of coffee from a tall can who already has a small queue of people holding out their cups. The coffee costs a halfpenny. You spend a penny at the beginning of the week on a halfpenny coffee on Monday morning, and you try to make the warmth from it last as long as possible. Rolling the cup between your palms, breathing the steam. Today is not coffee day. Today is Tuesday, which means you're saving the penny for Thursday, which is the day the rag merchant buys, and you need to have your weight sorted and your categories right, and your prices in your head before you go in. The categories of rag. You know them the way you know your own name. White cotton, best quality, no staining. That's your top price. 15 pence to 2 shillings a stone depending on the yard. White cotton, stained or slightly worn, 14 pence. Mixed colours, good condition, 12 pence. Mixed colours, poor condition, 8 to 10. The very worst rag, the stuff that's more whole than cloth, 6 pence a stone, and you'd better have a lot of stone to make that trip worth taking. Wool rags are different. They don't go to the paper mills, they go to the shoddy mills, mostly up in Yorkshire, where they're sorted by colour and quality and shredded down and recombined into new cloth that costs a fraction of original wool fabric and wears about as well as you'd expect. Shoddy. The word meant something specific in the trade before it became a general term for inferior quality. The original shoddy was the recombined wool fibre product, and it was called shoddy because it shed its fibres, because it was short staple and weak, because it fell apart relatively quickly under wear. But it was cheap, and cheap mattered. In a city where a working man's weekly wage might be 12 shillings, and his rent 5 of those and his food 4 more, cheap mattered absolutely. The coat a labourer wore in 1864 might well be shoddy. The blanket on his bed almost certainly. The suit a man got married in, the dress his wife wore to church, the children's everyday clothing, shoddy, much of it, or fustian, or some other form of recombined and reconstituted textile that started its life as the rags going into your sack right now. So your sack is the beginning of the supply chain that clothes a significant portion of the working poor of England. You are the first link, the invisible link, the link that everyone above you in the chain benefits from, and none of them, not a single one, has ever spent a moment thinking about. You're not bitter about this. You're a little bitter about this. The rag merchant's yard is on Bear Lane, on the south side of the river, which means getting there involves crossing the bridge or taking a wherry, and both of those cost time and money that reduce your margin on the Thursday run. You go on Thursdays and no other day unless you have so much weight it can't wait, which happens occasionally in summer when the picking is better. In winter, you have to accumulate for a full week before the load is worth the trip. The yard is run by a man named Gottschalk, who is German by origin and who has been running the yard for 20 years, and who is one of the most precisely informed people you've ever met when it comes to the market price of textile waste. Gottschalk knows the paper mill prices to the fraction of a penny. He knows which mills are running at capacity and which are hungry for material, and he adjusts his buying prices accordingly. And he does this in a way that's completely invisible to you unless you've been paying attention for long enough to learn the pattern, and you've now been paying attention for long enough to learn the pattern. When Gottschalk offers you 11 pence for white cotton, you know the mills are paying him at least 18. You know from Bess, who's been doing this for 20 years and knows Gottschalk better than she knows most people, that his margin is roughly 40%. You know, also from Bess, that if you hold out for 13, he'll usually come to 12. But if you push for 14, he'll get stiff and you'll end up with 12 and a bad feeling in the room that might affect the next week's business. So you aim for 13. You usually land at 12, sometimes 12.5, and you go back next week. The back of the yard, behind the main sorting shed where women sit in rows picking through piles of cloth and sorting by colour and type and condition, is where the rags go into bales. The bales are wrapped in sacking and tied with rope and loaded onto carts for the mills. Each bale weighs about 100 weight, about 56 pounds, and on a good day the yard gets through 20 or 30 bales. You've watched this once. Bess taking you to the back on a day when Gottschalk was in a good mood and willing to let an apprentice picker see the operation. The sorting shed smells of old cloth and dust, a dry smell, complex like the inside of a very old wardrobe. The women working there wear cloths wrapped around their lower faces against the dust, and even so they cough. Cotton dust in the lungs over years does things to a person. Everyone knows this. No one does anything about it. The women in the sorting shed earn about 8 pence to a shilling a day. You, on a good day, earn a shilling to 18 pence from the combined weight of everything in your sack. On a very good day, 2 shillings. On a bad day, 6pence. The average is something in the region of a shilling, which is 6 pence less than an unskilled labourer, and about what a domestic servant earns over and above her board and keep. It's not enough. It is never enough. But it's what there is, and there is a certain clarity in that which you have come to appreciate, in the way you appreciate other unchangeable things. The cold in November, the shortness of the days, the particular weight of a full sack. By 8 o'clock you have been working for just under 3 hours, and your sack is 2/3 full, and the pure bucket is full, and it's time to make decisions about the day. The pure needs to go to Bermondsey first. You can't carry it all morning. It becomes a problem if you carry it all morning. Not only in terms of smell, but in terms of the practical reality that it's a full-lidded bucket, and it sloshes, and the lid isn't perfect, and you'd like to deposit it before any of the imperfection of the lid becomes a problem for the lower half of your clothing. Bermondsey is south of the river. South of the river means London Bridge, which is free, or a wherry, which is not. You'll walk the bridge. The walk to London Bridge from where you are takes about 20 minutes at good pace, and the bridge itself adds another 10 if the traffic is moving, which at this hour it should be. The tanneries are clustered around the streets near Bermondsey Street itself, which is why that whole district has its reputation, which is to say, people who live near Bermondsey speak of their proximity to it in the same way that people speak of proximity to a prison, as a fact about location that explains many other facts about the location without requiring elaboration. The smell of the Bermondsey tanneries is a thing that exists in a different category from ordinary bad smells. Ordinary bad smells are bad in a simple linear way. There is a bad smell, and then it is gone, and afterwards you might think, that was bad. The smell of the tanneries is architectural. It occupies space. It has layers and sub-layers, a topography of stench that shifts depending on where you're standing and which direction the wind is coming from and what stage of the process each yard is in. There is the smell of the raw hides, animal and iron rich. There is the smell of the tanning liquor, made from oak bark and water, a dark vegetable smell that would be almost pleasant in isolation. There is the smell of the baiting process, which is what your pure bucket is contributing to, an ammonia-heavy smell that stings the eyes at close range, and under all of it, the basic smell of decay and transformation, of animal matter being disassembled and reassembled into something that is no longer quite animal. The first time Bess took you to Bermondsey, you were sick at the corner of Leather Lane, which the older hands found amusing. The second time, you made it to the tannery gate. The third time, you made it inside and carried out the transaction without incident, which Bess praised in her characteristic way, which is to not praise it at all, but to simply not comment on it, which is equivalent. You've been to Bermondsey perhaps 50 times since then. You've stopped being sick. You've started to notice the way the smell varies on different days and in different weather, the way it's worse in summer when the heat accelerates everything, the way November cold flattens it somewhat so that it's still terrible, but less aggressively terrible. The tannery you sell to is called Harrington's, which is not the biggest in Bermondsey but is not the smallest either, and which pays a fair price for the pure and doesn't make you wait as long as some of the others. The man at the gate is named Joseph, and Joseph has a weighing bench and a scale and a logbook, and he weighs your bucket, writes the number in the book, hands you coins, and sends you on your way with the empty bucket, all in the time it takes to say good morning. This morning's bucket weighs 11 pounds, which at the current rate of 8 pence per pound works out to 7 and 4 pence. 7 shillings and 4 pence for a bucket of dog dung collected over the course of a morning in November. It's not nothing. It's genuinely not nothing. 7 and 4 is more than the shoddy mill sorters make in a day. It is not comfortable. It is not enough to do anything significant with, but it is real money for real work, and you will take it. You hand back the bucket. Joseph nods. You nod. Transaction complete. Now back north, across the river, because the morning's rag-picking is not finished. You still have streets to cover. The sack is heavy enough that the trip across London Bridge is slower than the trip down, the weight pulling at your shoulder with more insistence than it had at 5 in the morning when you were fresh and cold and the sack was empty. London Bridge is loud. It is always loud. The bridge itself is wide, but the traffic density on it at this hour is such that wide is a relative concept, and the relative concept of wide as applied to London Bridge in November 1864 means you are threading yourself and your sack between carts and horses and other people, threading themselves between carts and horses in a constant shuffle that moves generally northward or southward, depending on which side you're on, at a pace determined entirely by what the cart in front of you is doing. The bridge smells of horse and coal, and the river, which at this hour and this tide has a muddy saline quality, salt coming up from the estuary on the flood. You can see the river through the gaps in the railings. Dark grey-brown water, moving with a purpose, a few small boats working across the flow, a larger barge being poled from the south bank. The sky above it has gone from the dark grey of pre-dawn to a lighter, more committed grey that is the Thames's characteristic winter sky, the kind of sky that might or might not produce rain at any moment, and that makes no promises about anything. Two men on the bridge are arguing about something that involves the cart they're driving, which has shed a wheel and is currently sitting at an angle that is preventing the traffic flow from achieving any kind of regularity. One of the men is gesticulating at the wheel. The other man is gesticulating at the horse. A crowd of people is building behind the cart, spreading out around it as best they can in the available space. Everyone doing their own navigation of the problem. You work your way through the outer edge of the crowd, staying close to the railing, moving fast. A woman in front of you is carrying a basket of something that smells like fish. The fish smell cuts through the cold air with authority. She's moving faster than the traffic around her, weaving, and you follow her slipstream because she's clearly done this before and knows the path through. On the far bank, you turn east rather than heading straight back north, because there's a stretch of streets along the south side of the river near Tooley Street that Bess has been working for years and that you're covering for her today, while her hands are bad. Bess's hands are bad more often in November than any other month. The cold gets into the joints, she says, and she says it without complaint, simply as fact, the way she says most things about the physical consequences of the work. Tooley Street and the streets behind it are different from the Seven Dials in ways that are subtle but real. This is a waterfront neighbourhood shaped by the river trade, and the waste it produces reflects that. A lot of rope and canvas and tar-stained materials that you can't do much with. A lot of sacking. A lot of broken equipment from the warehouses and the wharves. The bones here are different too, more fish, more variety from the sailors and dockers who make up much of the population and who eat differently from the inland poor. You work 2 streets and add another few pounds to the sack. Not a great haul, but it adds up. And then, near the end of the second street, you see something that makes you stop. There's a grating in the pavement. A grating that covers what, from the smell of it, is clearly a sewer opening. There's nothing unusual about this. The city has thousands of such gratings. But this grating has been lifted slightly, not fully, but shifted from its seat, one edge of it raised by about an inch from the surrounding pavement. And through the gap you can smell something that is different from the usual sewer smell. You know what this is. You know what it means because Bess has told you and because you've heard the stories for as long as you've been working the streets. Toshers. Someone has been through this grating recently, or is about to go through it. The toshers work the sewers. They've been doing it for years, for generations. A small and secretive community of people who go into the underground drain system of London looking for whatever the city has washed into it. Coins, mostly, the ones that fall through gratings or are lost in the gutters and washed down by rain. But also cutlery, small pieces of metal, occasionally jewellery, occasionally more. The sewers are the city's lost property, and the toshers are the ones who retrieve it. It is, by any reasonable measure, more dangerous than what you do. The sewer gases alone, hydrogen sulfide, methane, others, can overcome a person in seconds if they step into a pocket of them. The tunnels flood in heavy rain, sometimes with no warning, walls of filthy water coming through the brickwork at a speed that leaves no time for anything except drowning. The tunnels are dark, narrow in places, branching in ways that can disorient even experienced workers. People get lost, people don't come out, and yet the toshers come out more often than they don't. The ones who've been doing it long enough have a knowledge of the underground that rivals their knowledge of the streets above, a mental map of the whole subterranean network, every branch and junction and tributary, every low-ceiling crawl and every place where the current runs too strong to stand in. They go in groups, usually, never alone, 3 or 4 together, one always watching, always tracking the sounds, always smelling for the gases. And they earn well. More than rag-picking, on a good day significantly more. 6, 8, 10 shillings for a morning's work underground is not impossible if you know the right stretches and the right tides. You've thought about it. Bess knows you've thought about it. She has not forbidden it, because Bess doesn't forbid things, not in a direct way. She provides information and lets you draw your own conclusions. The information she's provided about toshering has been extremely detailed and has included stories about every bad outcome she knows of, told without embellishment but also without omission, so you have a very complete picture of exactly what can go wrong and in what way. She also mentioned once, at the end of a conversation about it, that old Thomas had done it for 3 winters in his 20s, and that the money he made had set him up well enough that he didn't need to do it anymore. She'd said this, and then moved on to something else without comment. That was 6 months ago. You've been thinking about it since. The grating is still slightly lifted. You stand there for a moment in the cold November morning with your sack on your shoulder and the sound of Tooley Street behind you and the smell of the sewer coming up through the gap. That particular smell that is the city's most secret smell. The smell of everything the city has expelled. Complex and dark and in its own way informative. Telling you things about what's down there and how recently and from what direction. You're not going in today. Not without preparation. Not without knowing the rules. Not without someone who knows the tunnels. But you are going to find the toshers. The group that works this section of the river. You've heard about them in the way you hear about most things, through conversations in the court, through other waste workers, through the social transmission of information that has no formal channel, but that moves efficiently nonetheless. The group is led by a man named Farrow. He has a daughter who sells watercress on the borough market stalls, and sometimes she talks to Bess, and sometimes Bess has passed things on to you in the way she passes things on, neutrally, without direction. Farrow's crew comes out of the river end in the late morning when the tide is right. You know the approximate timing. If you finish this street and get to the river at the right moment, you might catch them coming up. You finish the street. The sack is as heavy as you want to carry for now, heavier than is comfortable if you're also going to spend the next hour standing around waiting for toshers. But there's no place to put it down and nothing to do about it. You shift it to the other shoulder. Feel the immediate relief as the weight transfers and the compressed shoulder begins to unknot and walk toward the river. The river at this point is accessed through a gap between 2 warehouses that leads to a narrow strip of mud and gravel at the waterline. The Thames, at low tide, exposes a considerable foreshore. Not a beach exactly, nothing that comfortable, but a strip of churned mud and gravel and detritus that runs along the bank and that is, at this hour, already populated by its own specialists. The mudlarks work the foreshore. If the toshers work the sewers below the streets, the mudlarks work the mud below the water. They wade into the shallows at low tide, sometimes ankle deep, sometimes knee deep. searching through the mud and gravel for what the river deposits. Coal, mostly dropped from the coal barges loading and unloading along the north bank. Nails dropped from the shipyards. Copper bolts from boats under repair. Rope. Pieces of iron. Old chain. Occasionally something more unusual. A pocket watch dropped from a bridge. A coin purse lost overboard. A piece of cargo that went into the river instead of into a warehouse. The mudlarks are some of the poorest people in the city, poorer even than the ragpickers by most accounts, because the foreshore work is more directly physically punishing. The mud is cold in every season, but particularly devastating in winter, when the water temperature drops to something that produces, over a morning of wading, a numbness in the feet and legs that doesn't fully leave for hours after getting out. The mud itself is London's accumulated filth in concentrated form. Everything the city has put into the river over centuries, layered down into the banks, disturbed and redistributed by every tide. The children who do mudlarking are often the most desperate, small enough to get into the shallower margins, barefoot to feel the mud for objects that can't be seen, working fast to fill their small bags before the tide turns. You see two of them now, a boy and a younger girl, both of them already waded into their knees in the brown water, moving with the concentrated patience of people who know exactly what they're doing and are focused on doing it. You watch them for a moment. The boy finds something, reaches down with both hands, pulls something from the mud with effort, too far away to see what it is. He shows it to the girl. The girl shrugs. He puts it in his bag and moves on. You turn away from them and look along the waterline for the sewer outfall. The sewers empty into the river at various points along the bank. You can identify the outfalls by the smell and by the staining on the brick around them, where years of discharge have left their mark. The old sewers, the ones that were built when the city was smaller and didn't know what it was creating, empty more or less directly into the river at low tide, into the same river that provides the city's drinking water, which is one of the reasons the mortality statistics for this city in the 1840s and 1850s are what they are, which is to say, quite bad. Bazalgette's new sewer system is changing this. Joseph Bazalgette, engineer, Metropolitan Board of Works, has been building an intercepting sewer system since 1859 that will eventually carry the city's effluent east to outfalls near Barking and Crossness, away from the city, away from the drinking water supply. The work is still ongoing in 1864, still partly incomplete, a vast underground construction project that you see evidence of every few months when a street somewhere is closed and men are working below it. The new sewers are brick tunnels of considerable engineering, egg-shaped in cross-section, designed to keep the flow moving by the force of gravity and the accumulated pressure of the whole system. But the old sewers are still there, running underneath the new work, feeding into it in places, still active, still carrying the overflow of the neighbourhoods they've always drained. The old sewers are what the toshers work. The old ones have been there long enough to accumulate, have corners and bends and backwaters where things lodge. The new tunnels, clean and smooth and steep-sided, don't offer the same purchase to the material the toshers are looking for. You wait. After perhaps 20 minutes you hear them, voices in the tunnel, 2 or 3 of them, coming closer to the outfall, the sound of boots on wet brick, the splash of feet in shallow water, and then from the arched opening in the bank, 3 figures emerging into the low November light. Pharaoh you recognise from the description. A middle-aged man, short and solid, with the particular gait of someone who spends a lot of time in low-ceiling spaces, slightly hunched even now, even out in the open, the posture having become the default. His face is weathered and dark with ingrained grime in the creases, the same deep grime that's in the creases of your own face, you imagine, but more so. He is carrying a lantern, unlit now in the daylight, and a long pole that he uses as both a walking stick and a probe. His coat is extraordinary. It's long, below the knee, oilskin over some heavier material, clearly designed for the work in a way that his companions' coats aren't. The other two are a younger man and a boy, maybe 14, who looks at the light coming in from the river mouth with the expression of someone who has been underground for a while and is genuinely glad to see sky. Pharaoh is looking at what's in the bucket he carries. A metal bucket, this one for a completely different purpose from yours, for the deposition of fines rather than pure. He's counting something, sorting through it with the practiced speed of long habit. "Mr. Pharaoh, you say?" He looks up. His eyes are sharp, doing a quick assessment that takes in everything about you. The sack, the hook, the bucket now empty, your age, your familiarity with the area. In a second or two. "I know you," he says. It's not a question. "I work Bess's route. North side." He nods slowly. "Bess's girl." He looks back at his bucket. "What do you want?" "I want to understand the work," you say. A pause. The young man behind him has stopped pretending not to listen. The boy has found something fascinating to examine in the mud. "The work," Pharaoh says. "I've been thinking about it. I know the surface routes. I want to understand what's underneath." He looks at you for a long time. The cold air moves between you. On the river a boat passes, oars working, the oarsman not looking at the bank. "Bess know you're asking?" "Bess knows I've been thinking about it." "That's not the same thing." "No," you agree, "it isn't." Another pause. Pharaoh reaches into his bucket and pulls something out. A coin, dark with age and river sediment, that he rubs between his thumb and forefinger in a habitual way. He looks at it without looking at it, his eyes still on you. "Come Thursday," he says. "Suffolk side, junction of Horsley Lane and the Cut, 6 in the morning. Bring boots that go over the knee if you can find them." He looks at the coin one more time, then puts it back in the bucket. "Don't be late," he says. "We don't wait." He walks past you, his companions following. The boy at the rear looks at you once quickly, with an expression you can't quite read. Caution, maybe, or something else. Then they're gone, around the corner and into the city. You stand there for a moment with your full sack and your empty pure bucket and the smell of the river around you, and the memory of the smell from inside the tunnel, which is lingering in the cold air at the outfall. You've committed to something. You're not certain yet what. But Thursday is 2 days away, which means today and tomorrow are just Tuesday and Wednesday, and Tuesday and Wednesday mean the roots and the sack and the weight of the accumulation. You shift the sack back to your original shoulder, which has had a rest and is ready again, and you walk back up through the gap between the warehouses toward the street. The rest of Tuesday passes in the way that Tuesdays pass. You work the streets until the light starts to go, which in November is earlier than any season should allow. The sky shutting down by 3:30, with the air of something final about it. Not a sunset as such, but a gradual withdrawal of the light's willingness to make the effort. By 4 o'clock you're working by the light of the gas lamps and your own knowledge of the ground. The last hour of the workday, in the dark, is a different kind of work. The hook is less useful because you can't see well enough to judge what you're pulling out of a pile. You work more by smell and touch, the texture of cloth against your fingers, the weight and shape of bone, the cold brightness of glass. You've developed a sensitivity in your hands that is better than sight in some ways. More direct, less dependent on the mediation of distance and light. You stop at a cook shop on the way back. The cook shop is in a narrow premises off the main road, barely wide enough for two people to stand abreast, with a counter and a woman behind it who sells dishes of food that are hot and filling and cost either a penny or 2p depending on what's in them. Today it's a penny for a dish of something that has potato in it and some kind of meat. What kind is a question you've learned not to press. And a thick brown liquor that functions as sauce. You eat it standing at the counter because there is no seating, the whole shop being a counter and a stove and the woman behind the counter and nothing else. The heat from the stove is the most positive thing you've experienced all day, and you stand in it for as long as the eating takes and slightly longer, letting it work its way into the fabric of your coat. The cook shop woman is watching you with the slightly possessive impatience of someone who has more customers behind you and less space than she needs, and you take the hint and move out into the cold again, your hands around the empty dish for a few seconds before you hand it back. Back in the court. The argument from this morning is still going, or has started again, it's hard to say. The baby is not screaming, which might mean sleep or something worse. You're hoping sleep. You climb the stairs, careful on the third from the top, which is beginning to give and which will eventually give completely, and back into the room. Bess is there, which is a relief. Bess is there more evenings than she's not, but there are evenings when she isn't, and those evenings have a different quality to them, a vacancy. The room larger in her absence than it should be given how small she is. She looks at you, at your sack, at the fact that you're back and apparently intact. Tooley Street, she says. Done. How was the yield? Fair. Mostly canvas and sacking. Few bones. A hat from Rawlings Row, though. You put the hat on the table between you. Bess picks it up, turns it in her hands, runs a thumb along the torn brim, puts it back. 3p, she says. Maybe 4p if whoever's buying has had a good day. I thought the same. She nods, and there's something in the nod that is, in Bess's vocabulary, the equivalent of praise. Then, I talked to Farrow. Bess's face doesn't change. She continues doing what she was doing, which is sorting through a small pile of cloth scraps with the speed and certainty of someone who has done this 10,000 times. Pull, feel, assess, place. Pull, feel, assess, place. When? This morning, by the outfall on Tooley Street side. And? He said come Thursday, 6 in the morning. Bess finishes sorting the last of the scraps. She puts the good ones in the pile on the left and the rest in the pile on the right. The pile on the right is larger. He knows you've never been underground. I told him I wanted to understand the work. Understanding it and doing it are different things. I know. She looks at you then, directly, which Bess doesn't always do. Her eyes are very dark and very still. The first time's always a shock, she says. Not because of what you expect, because of what you don't expect. A pause. Keep behind Farrow. Do exactly what he says when he says it, without thinking about it first. If he stops walking, you stop walking. If he moves fast, you move fast. If he tells you to get out, you get out. And you don't ask why until you're on the street. Yes. And breathe shallow in the first section. The gases settle near the outfalls. Once you're into the main tunnel, it disperses better. But near the entrance, breathe shallow. How will I know if it's the gas? Your head will feel like it's coming loose from your neck, Bess says. If that happens, move. Don't think about it. Just move toward the nearest opening. She looks back at the cloth pile. The sorting is over. She begins folding what's in the left pile. 7 shillings and 4 from the pure, you say. Not bad. Weather helps. The cold keeps more of it solid. You do not examine this logic further. Some things are better accepted without investigation. Wednesday passes. Thursday morning comes. You find the knee boots. It takes most of Wednesday evening and a walk to 3 different second-hand sellers. But you find them. A pair of long boots, knee-high in leather, that have belonged to someone who did outdoor work of some kind. Their history legible in the wear patterns and the staining. Too big in the calf, but not dramatically so. You pack the leg with cloth the same way you pack the toe of your other boots. It's not elegant, but it'll hold. Thursday morning, 5 o'clock. You dress in the dark. Not your normal coat today, but a different one, heavier, that you've borrowed from someone in the building in exchange for the promise of some of what you find. This coat is longer. It'll serve as protection against the water if the water stays shallow. If the water doesn't stay shallow, no coat is going to help. You have the pole. Pharaoh said to bring something to probe with, and the pole you use for moving rubbish piles in the street is repurposed for this. 18 inches of iron bent at the tip, long enough to test ground before you commit your weight to it. Your lantern is borrowed as well. A small hand lantern with a candle inside. The kind that throws a yellowish circle of light about 2 feet in any direction, and is better than nothing. Pharaoh will have a proper lantern, the larger kind with a reflector behind the candle that directs the light forward. But you'll have your own as a backup. The junction of Horsley Lane and the Cut, south side. You're there at 10 to 6. Pharaoh is already there. The young man from Tuesday is there. The boy from Tuesday is there. And a 4th person you haven't seen before. A woman, roughly your age, compact and quick-looking, who assesses you in the same way Pharaoh did, and then looks back at the grating in the pavement that the group is gathered around. No one says good morning. This is not a good morning kind of gathering. Pharaoh opens the grating. He uses a specific tool for this. A piece of iron bent into an L shape that fits into the slot in the grating's frame and levers it up. The grating is heavy, cast iron, and it comes up with a sucking sound and a waft of air that is warm compared to the November street, damp warm, the warmth of something enclosed and biological. The smell is immediate and substantial. Breathe shallow, Pharaoh says. He says it to the group, not specifically to you, though you know it's specifically for you. The others have heard it many times. He goes first, down a fixed iron ladder set into the brick, descending into the dark below the street. His lantern goes ahead of him, its light flickering down. The young man goes second, the woman goes third, moving quickly and efficiently, and you understand as she does it that she's been down many times. Then you, then the boy behind you. The ladder is 8 rungs. You count them because counting helps with the part of your brain that is currently objecting quite loudly to the whole enterprise. 8 rungs, each rung cold and slightly slick with condensation, your hands gripping them hard, the pole tucked under your arm in a way that is awkward and will need to be sorted out before you can do anything useful with it. And then you're at the bottom, and then you're inside. The first thing you need to understand about the inside of a Victorian sewer in November 1864 is that it is not what you've imagined. You've imagined something like a tunnel, a rough-walled underground passage, and it is a tunnel, but it is not rough-walled. The old brick sewers are constructed with a precision that surprises you. The bricks are laid in courses that follow the curve of the arch above your head, each course overlapping the next, the whole thing held together by its own geometry. The people who built this were engineers, and you can feel the engineering in the solidity of the structure around you, the sense of intention, of design. It is damp and dark, and the smell is considerable, but it is not crude. The ceiling is about 5 feet above your head, not 5 feet above the water level, 5 feet above where you're standing, which is a narrow ledge along one side of the channel. In the centre of the tunnel, the actual drain, the water runs. And when I say water, I'm using the word loosely, the way London in 1864 uses it loosely, to mean the accumulated discharge of the streets above you, which is water plus everything the water has picked up on its way here, which is a list too long to complete. The water level is relatively low this morning, which is why Faro chose this morning. The tide is out, which pulls the outfall open and allows the accumulated flow to drain faster, which means lower levels in the upstream sections. In about 3 hours, when the tide turns and begins coming in, the level will rise, and the group will be out of here well before that happens. Because what happens in a sewer when the water backs up from the tide is something that makes the gas hazard seem pleasant by comparison. Your lantern is lit from Faro's. You hold it out to one side away from your body, the way Faro demonstrated on the street. The light it throws is enough to see the tunnel in a general sense. The curve of the arch, the ledge you're walking on, the water in the centre channel, the joints between the bricks. What it doesn't give you is confidence. The confidence is somewhere else, waiting, possibly outside where you left it. Faro doesn't give instructions once you're inside. The instructions were given on the surface, and they were: stay behind me, use your pole to check the ledge before you step on anything you're not certain of. If you hear a rushing sound, stop immediately and get to the highest point you can reach. The rushing sound means a flush, which is the sudden release of a backed-up section upstream. It doesn't happen often. It usually doesn't happen without some warning. But usually is not always, and the warning is only useful if you know what you're hearing. And knowing what you're hearing requires experience, and this is your first time in here. You walk. The ledge is about 18 inches wide enough for 1 foot in front of the other if you're careful. In the boots, with the extra packing in the leg, each step requires a moment of consideration, your ankle adjusting to the irregular surface of the brick below. Some of the bricks are loose. Your pole finds 2 loose ones in the first 50 feet and you step around them, placing your feet where the brick is solid, learning the rhythm of it. The smell. You thought you knew this smell from the gratings, from the outfall on Tooley Street. You did not know this smell. The street version was a diluted, mediated version, filtered through the distance between the grating and the actual tunnel. In here, it is full and complete and 3-dimensional. It surrounds you. It is the air. Not just your nose, your mouth, your skin, the fabric of your coat absorbing it. You breathe shallow. You breathe through your teeth a little, which changes the quality of what reaches you without doing anything fundamental about the quantity. Your stomach is making its opinions known. You listen to them and continue walking. Faro is scanning as he walks. He moves his lantern in a specific pattern. Forward, down to the water, left to the wall, back up, forward again. It's a continuous, systematic sweep that covers the full available space. He's looking at the water, at the edges of the water, at the base of the wall opposite where things collect when the current deposits them. He's reading the tunnel the way you read a street, looking for the indicators that tell you something worth picking up is here. He stops. You stop. Behind you, the boy stops. The stopping is immediate and synchronized, everyone responding to Faro's halt without needing to understand the reason. Faro crouches. He reaches out with his pole and draws something from the near edge of the water. It comes out of the mud and filth at the channel's edge with a sucking sound. He holds his lantern over it. A piece of metal, about 6 inches long, irregular in shape. He turns it in the lamplight, then holds it between 2 fingers in a particular way. "Fork," says the woman beside you. She says it quietly, in the same tone she'd use to point out a bird. Pharaoh wipes the fork against his coat. It's silver plate, or was. The fork is bent, one tine missing, the plating worn off in patches to show the base metal beneath. Not worth much, but worth something. It goes in his bucket with a sound of metal on metal. He stands. The group moves on. Over the next hour, in a stretch of old sewer running under what you estimate, based on your knowledge of the streets above and the angle of the tunnel's direction, to be somewhere under the junction of 3 streets east of Borough Market, the following items are recovered: 8 coins, 2 of them silver and 6 of copper, ranging from a halfpenny to what the young man identifies as a shilling so encrusted it's barely recognisable. A copper tap fitting, a length of good chain, maybe 18 inches, that the woman tests with her weight and keeps. More metal fragments too small and damaged to identify. A bone handle from something, possibly a knife. A quantity of rope with enough integrity left in it to be worth taking out. 2 whole bottles, 1 intact, 1 cracked but holding, and this is the one that makes Pharaoh's expression shift very slightly in the direction of satisfaction. A small piece of jewellery. It's a brooch, or rather, it's what's left of a brooch. An oval of tortoise shell, the pin backing still attached, the original decoration largely gone, but the shell itself intact. You don't know what it's worth. Pharaoh does. He wraps it in a piece of cloth and puts it separately from everything else. "What is it?" you ask. Your first word since entering the tunnel. "Probably nothing," Pharaoh says. He looks at you briefly. "But if the backing is gold-filled and the shell is real and not composite, then it's something." He keeps walking. Your pole has found 2 more loose bricks, and you've begun to understand the particular language of the tunnel floor. The way the sound of the pole against solid brick is different from the sound against loose brick. A slightly hollow report compared to the ring of the solid. A difference so small you have to be listening for it specifically. You're listening for it specifically. This is what you're doing in addition to walking and breathing and managing the lantern and keeping your position relative to Pharaoh and the group. You're listening to the pole, building the vocabulary of the floor. There's a junction. The main tunnel intersects with a smaller one coming in from the right, barely 4 feet high, a tributary bringing flows from streets further north. The current from it is faster than the main channel, a visible difference in the surface of the water where the 2 meet. Pharaoh crouches at the junction and scans it for a moment, then shakes his head and moves past. "Too shallow," the young man explains quietly, reading your face. "Not enough headroom to work it. You'd be on your hands and knees, not worth what you'd find." "Has anyone worked it?" "Pharaoh went in about 6 years ago, found half a sovereign and a pocket watch that mostly worked." The young man pauses. He also found a rat's nest the size of a chair, so he stopped going in. "The rats. You knew there would be rats." Bess had mentioned the rats with a specificity that suggested personal experience. "The sewer rats of London are a population distinct from the surface rats, larger on average, more confident, better fed on what the sewers provide. They are in the tunnels continuously, moving in the darkness at the edge of what your lantern reaches, visible as occasional pairs of eyes at water level or along the opposite wall. They don't approach the group. The toshers move loudly enough and carry enough light that the rats maintain a respectful distance, but they're there. You're aware of them as a consistent presence just beyond sight, watching, waiting for the group to move on so they can investigate what's been disturbed. One appears close enough to see clearly. A large brown rat sitting on a ledge on the far wall, absolutely still, watching you with bright eyes. It's the size of a small cat. It doesn't move as you pass. It waits, with the patience of a creature that has all the time in the world and knows the terrain better than you do, and watches you go. The woman makes a low sound. Not alarm, not quite. An acknowledgement. The rat doesn't react to it. He knows us, the woman says. Some of them do. The ones that stay in the same section long enough, they get to recognise the group. They know we stir things up and bring things close to the surface. Like ragpickers, you say. She looks at you sideways. A brief, assessing look. Something like that, she says. Yes. The tunnel continues. You are, you estimate, perhaps 200 yards from the entry point. Far enough that if you turned around now and walked back, it would take 3 minutes to reach the ladder. Close enough that 3 minutes is achievable if you need it. You are not comfortable. Nothing about this is comfortable. The ceiling, while higher than it was near the entrance, is still close enough that you're aware of it, aware of the weight of the street above it, aware of the fact that between you and the open air there is approximately 12 feet of brick and earth, and the ordinary life of the city going about its business with no knowledge of or interest in the 5 people moving through the dark below. But you're managing it. The shallow breathing has become less effortful. The smell has not improved, will never improve, but your brain has begun categorizing it as information rather than insult. The lantern light is adequate. The pole is doing its job. You are within the constraints of everything functional. Pharaoh stops again. He holds up his free hand, the one not holding the lantern. The group goes still. You hear it before you understand it. A change in the sound of the tunnel. A new sound, low and continuous, coming from somewhere behind and above you. Not the sound of water moving in the channel, a different sound, a rushing. Your body responds before your brain does. You move, everyone moves. Not back, not forward, but up and to the side, to where the ledge is widest, to where the wall curves out and gives you something to press against. Pharaoh's lantern swings as he moves and throws wild shadows on the brick. The rushing grows louder. It's not as loud as you expected. That's the first thing you notice when it passes. It's not the catastrophe it sounded like from inside the tunnel, where every sound is amplified and distorted by the brick walls. What comes through is a surge in the channel, the water level rising by perhaps 6 inches and the current accelerating, a flush from somewhere upstream, running through and past you with a speed that would have knocked you from the ledge if you'd still been on it, might have swept you into the main channel. 6 inches, not a deadly surge. But what comes down this tunnel when the conditions are worse, when a thunderstorm above drops its load into every gutter and every drain in the city at once, when the accumulated head pressure from miles of drainage finds this channel at once, that is something different. That is a wall. That's what the toshers call the wave. Not a literary exaggeration, but a physical reality. Something that comes through these tunnels like a thing alive and moving with a purpose. The surge passes. The water level returns to something near its previous depth. The rushing sound retreats. The tunnel goes quiet again except for the steady trickle of the normal flow, and the distant muffled sound of the city above you. Pharaoh looks at you. "First time?" he says. "Yes." "Good. You moved. Some people freeze." He says it with the same inflection he'd used to describe the weather. Not congratulation, just the neutral recording of a fact that has implications for your continued employment in this capacity. You moved. This is the first criterion. Everything else is learnable. Not moving is not learnable or not quickly enough for it to matter. He turns back to the tunnel and keeps walking. An hour and a half later you come out. The same ladder, the same iron rungs, the same slick cold surface of them, and then the flat grey November sky above the grating, and you're up and out and on the street again, and the street smells amazing. That is the one thing about toshering that nobody who hasn't done it can understand. The smell of London street air after an hour in the tunnel. The coal smoke and the horse dung and the 1,000 other contributions of 3 million people living their lives on top of each other. All of it smells like spring. All of it smells like something clean and bright and open. You stand there on the pavement with Pharaoh's group around you, all of them replacing the grating, all of them breathing the surface air with the same quiet appreciation. And you understand for the first time why they do it. Not just the money, the return, the fact that the street is restored to you as something worth breathing, at least for a few hours, at least until the next time. Pharaoh's bucket is a satisfying weight. He sorts through it quickly on the pavement with the efficiency of someone who has done this many times. Coins separated from metal scraps, the whole pieces from the broken, the identifiable from the ambiguous. The 2 silver coins turn out to be genuine, a shilling and a sixpence, 1843 and 1852 minted, dark but solid. The copper coins add up to a shilling and 3 pence. The chain is copper and fetches more than you expected, somewhere between a shilling and 2 depending on who's buying. The brooch is still wrapped in its cloth, still to be assessed. Your personal take for the morning, as Pharaoh calculates it, is 1 shilling and 2pence. Less than a full Tuesday's rag picking, but for less time. And this was your first time, learning, getting in the way as much as helping. The second time, and the third, and the 40th. These things change. Thursday fortnight, Pharaoh says. Same time, same place. He means Thursday in 2 weeks. You're not being invited every week. You're being tested, assessed over a series of exposures, the same way you'd train any new hand in any trade. This is how the knowledge is transmitted. In person, in the dark, in the tunnel, slowly, and with the understanding that the knowledge might one day save your life and therefore cannot be rushed. The Thursday fortnight, you say. And that's how the toshering begins. The weeks pass, November becomes December. The cold deepens from unpleasant to serious, the kind of cold that comes up from the street through your boots no matter what you've packed the toes with, that turns the mud in the court to a rigid surface by midnight, and back to mud again by 9 in the morning. The water in the pure bucket develops a skim of ice by early morning that you have to break before moving. Bess's hands get worse. She's wrapping them now every morning, strips of cloth around each finger joint, and still they move with a slowness that wasn't there in September. She doesn't complain, she works. But you take the longer routes, the heavier routes, the ones that involve the most walking and carrying, because she needs to preserve whatever she has left in those hands to get through the winter and into spring when the cold eases and the joints ease with it. You've been to Pharaoh's tunnel twice more. Each time something has shifted slightly in your understanding of the underground. You're starting to build the mental map, Not the whole map. That takes years. Faro has years. But the local section, the stretch between the junction and the outfall, the tributary on the right that's too shallow to work, the place 60 yards in where the ledge narrows to 8 inches and you have to turn sideways to pass it. You're starting to read the smells as indicators, the sharper notes that suggest a tributary from a domestic drain, the sulphur undertone that means the gas is present somewhere ahead and you go careful, the particular richness that means you're near a long-standing deposit, a place where things have been settling for months or years and the toshers probe might find anything. The finds accumulate. They're small, coins, hardware, occasional jewellery fragments, the odd tool, but they accumulate, and Faro is scrupulously fair in the division, each person's share calculated precisely and paid in coin at the surface. The money supplements the rag money. Together they push your weekly income above £1 a day on average, some days more, some days less. The fluctuation driven by weather and luck and the inconstant generosity of the streets and the sewers in providing what you need them to provide. You find, in the 3rd week of December, a pocket watch. It's in a backwater behind the junction, in the accumulated silt where the current slows and deposits its load. Your probe touches it, the particular high-pitched ring of metal on metal, a note completely distinct from the dull thud of brick, the sucking give of silt, and you slow down and crouch and work it free from the mud with the probe, and then your hands, carefully, because watches have delicate mechanisms and a cracked case is worth less than an intact one. It comes up into the lantern light whole. The case is silver, tarnished black but whole, the glass cracked at one edge but still present, the hands still in place though stopped at what might be 3:45 or 9:15. Impossible to say. The back, when Faro pries it open with the specialist tool he carries, reveals the movement, water-damaged but potentially salvageable. Faro looks at it for a long time. Hallmarked, he says, 1847, London mark. He closes it again, turns it over. There are initials on the back, engraved JRM. What's it worth, you ask? As it stands, maybe 4 shillings for the silver content if it goes to the refiner. If the movement can be repaired, a watchmaker might give you 8 or 10 for the whole thing. 8 or 10 shillings, more than 3 days' rag-picking income in a single object. Half yours, Faro says, and before you can respond to this unexpectedly generous calculation, he continues, you found it. Half to the finder, half to the group. That's the rule. You become aware in the weeks that follow of the social world that surrounds the toshers. They have a community, as tight-knit as the ragpickers community, but more secretive. They know each other across the different tunnel sections, across both sides of the river, and there is a network of information that flows between them. Which sections are running high? Which have been recently flushed by the parish authorities who occasionally attempt to clean the old sewers, which sections are being incorporated into Bazalgette's new works and will therefore be closed. This information is valuable. It changes the routes, changes where you go and when. There's a woman called Mrs. Cutter who Faro consults sometimes, a tosher from a previous generation who worked the tunnels for 20 years, and now, too old for the underground, keeps a small shop in Suffolk where she sells salvage and information in roughly equal proportion. She knows the old tunnel maps better than anyone living, Faro says, because she memorised them in an era when the maps were still accurate and the tunnels unchanged. Now the city is changing around the maps. The new sewer cuts crossing the old ones, the street works above altering the drainage patterns below. She sits in the shop and reads the old knowledge like a book, and tells you what's still true and what isn't, You visit her once, with Pharaoh. The shop is one room, floor to ceiling with salvage. The years of underground work arranged in no visible system but findable by her in seconds. She knows where everything is the way you know where everything is in Bess's sack. The smell of the shop is dense and particular. Old metal and old cloth and the residue of underground work. The smell of the tunnels brought up and enclosed in 4 walls. She's old, with the posture you've come to associate with people who've spent years underground, the hunch that stays even when there's no ceiling close above. Her hands are like Bess's hands, but more so. The joints thickened by decades of cold water. She looks at you once sharply, and then looks at Pharaoh. "Girl," she says. "Sharp one," Pharaoh says. "Good with the probe." Mrs. Cutter looks at you again, not dismissively, appraisingly. "My mother did the tunnels," she says. 1810s, before the commission started clearing them. Different world then. She picks something up from a shelf behind her, a coin thick with verdigris. Found this on her first week. Spanish. Don't know how it got down there. Maybe 200 years old by then. She puts it back. "The tunnels remember everything," she says. "Everything the city loses, the tunnels keep." A thing goes into a drain in 1590, and in 1864 it's still there, buried a little deeper every decade, waiting. She's looking at you with an expression that is either philosophy or warning. "The question is how long you're willing to wait for it," she says. "January." The January cold is different from November cold, deeper and more committed, a cold that has had 2 months to establish itself and intends to stay. The Thames doesn't freeze this year. The embankment work, Basil gets new walls containing the river, has changed the flow enough that the frost fairs that used to happen when the Thames froze solid are becoming rarer. But the tributaries freeze, and the streets freeze, and the court outside your room freezes in the night and stays frozen all day. The broken paving stones fixed in their irregular pattern like a puzzle abandoned mid-solution. The rag picking is harder in January. The rubbish piles freeze. The hook needs to break the surface before it can probe beneath it, a 2-stage process that slows everything down. The rags themselves, if they've been sitting in a pile since the previous day, are often wet and then frozen, which does them no good, and the weight of ice adds to the weight you're carrying without adding to the value. The sewer work is actually better in January. The cold reduces the gases, Pharaoh explains. The bacterial processes that produce the methane and the hydrogen sulfide slow down in cold temperatures the way all biological processes slow down. The tunnel air is easier to breathe in January than in August. The smell is still the smell, but the acuity of it, the aggressive chemical front of it, is lessened. And the toshers know the winter deposits, places where the autumn rains have washed a fresh layer of silt over the surface of the old deposits, covering coins and objects that might have been found months ago but weren't, because the previous layer was still there. In January, you're sometimes working fresh ground in an area you've visited many times. You find in January, in that particular stretch 60 yards in from the junction, where the ledge narrows and you always have to turn sideways, a concentration of small copper coins in the silt at the water's edge. You find them by the sound of the probe, that distinctive ring, and then by feel, reaching into the cold water carefully, not grabbing, probing with your fingers to find each coin before you take it. 7 coins in a space the size of your palm, held in the mud together as if they fell at once, from a pocket or a purse or some kind of container that rotted long ago. 1840s mostly, some earlier. 3 shillings and 2 pence in total. Pharaoh looks at them when you bring them out and says nothing for a moment. Someone's bad day, the young man says. Or someone's worst day, the woman says. You hold the coins for a second before putting them in the group bucket. They're cold, much colder than the surrounding temperature, having been in the silt a long time, and the cold of them goes through your fingers in a way that you notice and then think about for the rest of the morning. Someone dropped these or lost these or threw them here in what might have been an act of despair, or they simply fell from a cut pocket or a torn lining, and they've been in the mud since then, waiting, and now they're in your hand and they're going to be divided among 5 people and spent on food and coal and the things that make it possible to continue surviving another day in a city that takes everything it can and occasionally gives a little back. The tokens, the coins, the tortoiseshell brooch, the silver pocket watch, which the watchmaker took in for repair and whose eventual fate you don't know. The hat from Rawlings Row that got 4pence from a dealer in Drury Lane, who seemed pleased with himself for talking you down from 4.5 pence. These are the things that accumulate, the objects of other people's lives passing through your hands, redistributed, reassigned, made useful again, or melted down, or mended, or reworked into something that continues the object's life in a different form. You are the city's metabolism. That's the word Bess used once, without explanation, and you've thought about it since. Metabolism, the process by which a living thing takes what it has consumed and transforms it and uses it and excretes what it cannot use. London consumes everything. London excretes into the streets and the gutters and the sewers and the Thames. And somewhere in that process, in the gap between consumption and excretion, in the space where most cities would simply waste things, are the ragpickers and the bone grubbers and the toshers and the mudlarks, reaching in, recovering, converting. This is not romantic. You don't think about it as romantic. It's too cold and too heavy and too smelly and too uncertain for romance, but it is real. What you do is real in a way that a great deal of the economy of London is not real. You make something from nothing, which is the fundamental act, the thing that precedes all other commerce. Before the rag merchant can sell to the paper mill, before the paper mill can sell to the printer, before the printer can sell to the publisher, before the publisher can sell the novel to the lady in the drawing room, you have to go out in the November morning with your hook and your sack and pick the rag off the street, and nobody in that chain thanks you for it, and the novel doesn't mention it, and the lady in the drawing room turning the smooth pages doesn't think about where the paper came from, and why would she, and why should she? That's not what novels are for. But you know, March comes. The seasonal shift that Bess promised would come, that the waste workers in the court had predicted would change things. It comes. The cold releases its grip gradually, not all at once. There are still nights in March when the water in the basin freezes, but the mornings are lighter earlier and the afternoons are longer, and the streets don't smell the same way they smell in winter. That frozen, flattened smell of cold and coal, but start smelling the way they'll smell in spring, complex and wet and occasionally almost pleasant when the wind comes from the right direction and brings something green with it from wherever there is green in this city. The rag picking is better in spring. The piles are richer. People have been clearing out through the winter, it seems, or the winter has destroyed things that summer might have saved, and the streets in March and April have more volume in them. You start the day earlier because the light cooperates, and you end later for the same reason, and the sack on Thursday is heavy enough that Gottschalk gets a better look on his face when you come through the yard gate. The look of a man who sees a transaction that will please him. Your prices go up. Not by much, but Bess has been coaching you on the negotiation, and you've started applying the principles with some success. You hold at 13 pence for the white cotton and gottschalk. After the usual performance of reluctance comes to 12.5, which is half a penny per stone better than you were getting in November. Across a Thursday delivery of, say, 20 stone of cotton rag, that halfpenny per stone is 10 pence, which is the difference between a meal and no meal. Bess's hands have improved with the spring, not all the way back to what they were. The winter has left something permanent in the joints, a stiffness that the warmth reduces but doesn't eliminate, but better. She's back on the longer routes, back to working the full day, and the energy of the work in spring, the lightness of the morning and the generosity of the streets seems to animate her in a way the winter didn't allow. She notices you differently, not more kindly than before. Bess has always been kind in her way, in the practical, unsentimental way of people who've had to construct kindness from limited materials, but with a different quality of attention. She's watching what you've become over the winter, assessing it, calculating something. One evening in April after supper she says, "You could work the Newington route." The Newington route is her best route. It covers a stretch of streets in Newington that she's had for 15 years, that she's cultivated over that time the way a gardener cultivates a plot, knowing which households put out what and when, knowing the back door arrangements at 4 different kitchens, knowing the particular rhythms and yields and personalities of every significant pile. It's worth more than any other single route she has. It's worth, she's told you once and only once, about 1/3 of her total weekly income. She's not giving it to you. She's saying you could cover it on the day she can't. What days, you ask? When the hands are bad, when it's wet enough that the clay freezes. She pauses. More often now than before. This is the most she's admitted in so many words to the progression of the joint pain. It's true. The frequency of the bad days has increased over the winter. It's not a crisis yet, but it has a direction. "I'll take it," you say. She nods. The way she nods is the way she does everything, with precision and economy, no excess in it. The nod means the thing is decided, and now you both move on. Later that night, lying in the dark listening to the court below, you think about the calculation she's made and you've made, the quiet negotiation of it. Bess is teaching you her routes the way Pharaoh is teaching you his tunnels, gradually, in person, in the actual physical spaces, because that's the only way this knowledge transfers. There's no book of ragpicking routes, there's no guide to the old sewer sections. The knowledge lives in the people who have it, and it transfers only when the person who has it decides to give it, and the giving is always conditional on the assessment of the person who will receive it. You are being assessed, you are evidently passing. May, a morning in May when the sun is actually visible, not performing warmth but actually warm, the light coming into the court at an angle that hits the upper floors of the buildings and throws a band of pale gold across the stone, and you stand in it for a moment before beginning the day's first route. Not long, a few seconds, just the warmth of the light against your face. The streets in May are different streets. The mud has dried to dust in the drier stretches, and the smell has shifted to a dry, complex smell, rather than the wet, complex smell of winter, and the pace of life has shifted with the warmth. People move faster, stand less stooped. The market stalls are loaded with the first spring produce, and the colour of them is vivid against the grey stone and the brown wood of the buildings. On a Thursday in May, you do something you've been planning for 3 weeks. You carry your Thursday load to Gottschalk's yard as normal. You negotiate as normal. You collect your payment as normal. But instead of taking the most direct route back to the Seven Dials, you walk east, down to the river, over London Bridge, which is always London Bridge in the noise and crowd and river smell of it, south, through Bermondsey, past the tanneries with their change smell in the warmth, worse and also more complex, the baiting tanks active, the hides steaming slightly in the May air, and then further south to a small hill in the Bermondsey Green area from which, if you go to the right point on the crest and face north, you can see the city. Bess told you about this place last autumn, in the same neutral way she tells you most things. She described it as a place she went once to think about something, and it turned out to be useful for that. She didn't go into more detail. You've been meaning to come since you mentioned it. It takes 40 minutes to get here from the bridge, and the walk through Bermondsey involves the full tannery experience and also the leather market, where you pass through alleys between warehouses that smell of cured hide and linseed oil, and the particular sawdust and metal smell of the cutting shops, and the market itself is already moving by this hour, men in leather aprons carrying hides and calling to each other in the shorthand of a trade where everyone knows everyone else. And then the hill. It's not dramatic. It doesn't have a name anyone uses consistently. It's just a rise in the ground, the geology of South London pushing up through the street level, a few streets of terraced housing on its sides, and at the top a small area of open ground where some trees have survived the city's encroachment, by being on ground that nobody found useful for building. You go to the open ground and you face north and you look. London. The river first, because you always see the river first from any height south of it. It curves through the middle distance, wide and dark and silver where the light hits it, and you can follow the line of it from east to west until it disappears behind the buildings. The bridges, London Bridge right there below you, the traffic on it tiny from this distance, a constant movement of small figures and horses and carts. Suffolk Bridge to the west, Blackfriars beyond that, its new Victorian stonework lighter than the old bridges around it. North of the river, the city, the full mass of it. St. Paul's Dome. You know it immediately. It's the first thing that rises above everything else. Wren's great dome against the spring sky, the cross at the top catching the morning light, and around it and below it and in every direction from it, the city, mile upon mile of it, the rooftops and the chimneys and the church spires, so many church spires. The Victorians built churches at a rate that suggests genuine competition between parishes for altitude, and each one adds its vertical mark to the skyline. The smoke. In May, the smoke is lighter than in winter. The coal fire's reduced because the heating is less needed, but it's still there. The permanent grey-brown haze that sits above the city like a second sky, thinner here and thicker there, generated by 1,000,000 domestic fires and 1,000 factories and the river traffic and the railway engines, and it gives the whole view a particular quality, a softness at the edges, a blurring of the far distances into something impressionistic. 3,000,000 people. Somewhere in all of that, the court where you sleep and the streets where you work and the rag merchant's yard and the Bermondsey tanneries, somewhere in there, the tunnel under the junction where the sewer meets the tributary, the place 60 yards in where the ledge narrows, the backwater where the winter coins were lying in the mud, somewhere in there, in the houses you can't identify from here, the drawing rooms and the dining rooms and the libraries, the people using the paper you made possible, wearing the shoddy cloth that started in your sack, touching the recovered and repaired and redistributed objects that passed through your hands. You try to hold both realities at once, the view from here, the clean abstraction of it, the dome and the river and the spring sky, and the reality of it, the court and the mud and the sack and the tunnel. They're the same place. The beautiful and the unbearable are the same place. This is what Bess came here to think about. You understand now why it's useful. You stay for perhaps half an hour. Long enough for the cold in the ground to start coming through the soles of the boots. Then you walk back. The months continue. June, with the heat that turns the city's smell from complex to aggressive, the streets generating a miasma so thick on the hottest days that the crossing sweepers keep their heads down and the respectable classes close their windows. The sewers in June are a different proposition entirely. The gas is multiplied by the warmth, and Farrow revises the entry protocols accordingly. You don't go in unless the morning is cool, you don't stay past an hour regardless of what you're finding. You treat any sign of gas in the air as a reason to leave immediately rather than a reason to investigate. In June, there's an incident that the group talks about for weeks. Not in your section, in a section further east, worked by another group. 2 men, experienced toshers, went into a section that had been cleared the week before and came out an hour later, both badly affected by gas. One of them taken to the hospital at Guy's, where he stayed for 4 days before being discharged. The section had looked clear. The smell had been manageable, but somewhere in the drainage from the street above something had changed, some new source of organic material, and the methane had accumulated in a pocket that neither man had detected until they were already in it. Farrow tells this story without embellishment, and without the dramatic pause that a storyteller might put before the punchline. He tells it factually, the way he tells everything, and the factual telling of it is more alarming than any dramatization would be, because it presents the risk clearly and completely, without the comfortable distance of narrative performance. After telling it, he revises the entry protocol further. 2 people go in 10 feet ahead of the group and wait for 5 minutes. If both come out able to speak clearly, the group enters. If either shows signs of confusion or headache, no one enters that day. The woman, whose name you have learned is Nell, and who has been toshering since she was your age and is now 22, takes the advance check regularly. She explains her approach. You breathe in slowly through the nose immediately after entering. You hold the breath for 5 seconds. You exhale and assess. Any sweetness in the smell, a sweet, slightly rotten sweetness that is methane's distinguishing note from the general sulfur base of the tunnel, means possible pocket ahead. Any sudden headache means probable pocket nearby. Both mean you leave, and you leave fast, and you do not pause to look for it. You memorize this. You practice it in the tunnel, on days when the air is clean, building the habit so that the habit is there when you need it without having to think it through. The summer passes and autumn begins, and then it's November again, and you've been doing this for a year. A year. The version of you standing in this court on a November morning, looking up at the narrow strip of sky between the buildings with the baby crying, and the argument below, and the sack over your shoulder and the hook in your pocket, is a different person from the version who stood here a year ago. Same height, roughly, same coat, different patches, same boots, replaced newspaper, but different in the ways that count. You know things. You know the Newington route as well as Bess does now, or close to it. You know the back door at the second kitchen and the cook's name, Margaret Dower but honest, and the particular rhythm of the Tuesday yield there versus the Thursday yield. You know the Gottschalk negotiation to a level of precision that Bess says is actually slightly over-researched, that you've gathered more data about it than is necessary. But this is, she implies, a forgivable excess. You know the tunnel. 60 yards in from the junction, the narrowing of the ledge. 80 yards, the place where the current picks up before the curve itself, where you turn your lantern toward the inner wall to see the backwater behind the pipe junction. The backwater is your discovery, yours and Nell's, found on a wet September morning when a higher than usual water level had pushed the flow over the normal channel edge and cut a new temporary path along the wall, and in following the new path you'd found the backwater, a pocket of relatively still water behind a broken pipe support that had been accumulating undisturbed since the pipe was put in, which was, based on the oldest coins in it, sometime in the 1830s. The backwater has been the best single find of your toshering year over the course of 4 visits, careful and incremental, not depleting it faster than it can be worked. The backwater has produced coins totalling approximately 3 shillings in old copper and 1 silver sixpence, 2 pewter spoons, a child's toy, a small tin horse, tarnished black but intact, a ring, copper set with green glass that Pharaoh says might be paste but might not, currently with a jeweller in the borough for assessment, and a quantity of small metal objects, buttons, pins, pieces of fittings, whose accumulated weight produced a decent day's pay at the scrap dealer. The ring comes back from the jeweller in October. The jeweller's verdict: the setting is silver gilt. The glass is not glass, but a poor quality green garnet, and the whole thing in its current tarnished and water-damaged state is worth about 4 shillings. In better condition, perhaps 8. He offers 4 for it as it stands. Pharaoh takes the 4 and divides it according to the rule. Your share, as the primary finder, is 2 shillings. 2 shillings for a ring from a sewer backwater. Someone wore that ring. Someone put that hand into the water, washing, throwing away, an accident, a moment of extremity, and the ring went with it, and then the drain, and then the silt, and then 30 years of sediment, and then your hand, and then the jeweller's hand, and now the money from it is in your pocket and the ring is on a shelf, in Borough, waiting for whoever can afford 8 shillings in better days. The objects of other people's lives. They have a way of staying in the memory. The silver watch, JRM engraved on the back. The child's tin horse. The garnet ring. The coins from what might have been someone's worst day. They don't feel like treasure. They feel more personal than treasure. More specific. They carry something of where they've been. November again, and you're thinking about this on a Tuesday morning, working the route alone because Bess is having a bad hands day, and the morning is going well enough. The sack is at a good weight by 8 o'clock, and the pure bucket is almost full, and you're on your way back through Thrips Court, where the dead cat was a year ago, and is not now, and will be something else tomorrow, when you hear a sound that you've been hearing all morning but are only now, for some reason, distinguishing from the general background of the city. A child's voice, a crying specifically. Not the baby from the room 2 doors along, whose cry you know well enough to identify in the dark. A different crying, high-pitched and effortful. The crying of a child who has been crying for some time and is now crying without expectation of a response, just the simple mechanical expression of distress that has no other outlet. You stop. At the far end of Thrips Court, near the wall where the dead cat was, there's a bundle of cloth. You've passed it without registering it as anything significant because bundles of cloth in gutters are one of the expected features of the environment, and your eye processes them as background. But the crying is coming from the bundle. You approach. The child is perhaps 2 years old, wrapped in a piece of sacking that is doing a poor job of keeping it warm in the November morning. It's sitting in the gutter in the way that very young children sit when they don't know they're in a gutter. Just sitting, crying, not understanding the category of the situation it's in. You look around the court. There's no one else. Thrip's court is empty this morning except for you and the child and the crying. You crouch down. The child looks at you with the expression that very young children have when confronted with strangers. Not fear exactly, not welcome exactly, just a complete and unmediated assessment. Brown eyes, red face from the cold and the crying, nose running thoroughly. A girl, you think, though the sacking makes this hard to confirm. Where's your mother, you say, which is an approximately useless question to put to a 2-year-old, but that you put anyway because it's what you have. The child says something that isn't words yet. Right, you say. You stand up, you look at the court again. Nothing. You look at the 2 doorways that open onto the court. They're closed. Beyond one of them there's no sound. Beyond the other there's a low, irregular sound that you process after a moment as snoring. You look at your sack, your hook, your pure bucket. All the weight of a Tuesday morning's work, all the mathematics of it, the stone of rag and the bone and the pure and the bottles. Then you look at the child. Come on then, you say. You pick her up. She weighs about as much as a good morning's worth of rag. She's wet from the gutter and cold, and she grabs at your coat with both hands, with the specific grip of a child who has recently been without a thing to hold on to and intends to correct this situation. You carry her and the sack and the hook and the pure bucket back through Thrip's court to the street. You stop at the cook shop, where the woman behind the counter looks at you and the child with an expression of professional assessment. Know anything about this one, you ask? The cook shop woman knows everything about the neighbourhood. She's been in the same spot for 11 years, and she processes information about the people around her the way you process the weight of a sack. Automatically, continuously, with precision. That's Margaret Lyle's girl, the woman says. From the court on the other side of the post box. Margaret was poorly last week. A pause. More poorly than usual. She takes the child from you with the matter-of-fact authority of someone who has handled many children and most crises. The child goes to her without apparent objection, too tired and too cold to maintain preferences. I'll send the boy to find out what's going on, the cook shop woman says. Leave her with me. You stand there for a moment. The child is now eating something from the cook shop woman's hand, efficiently and without looking up, with the total focused attention that very hungry children give to food. You take the sack and the hook and the bucket and walk back to the court. This story, such as it is, does not have a dramatic resolution. The child's mother was found, alive, sick but living, in the room on the other side of the post box. The cook shop woman made arrangements of the kind that cook shop women in places like this are always making. The informal arrangements of neighbourhood and necessity. The child went back to the mother. The mother recovered. You know because you see the child occasionally in the court now, running on the paving stones in the tentative way of a 2-year-old, learning the range of possible movement. She looks at you sometimes when she sees you. She doesn't know what to make of you. You don't know what to make of it either. This is the other thing about the waste trade that nobody mentions in the usual accounting of it. The social tissue. The ragpickers and the bone grubbers and the toshers work the same streets and the same tunnels, generation after generation, and in doing so they become the intimate knowledge of the place. They know which households are in difficulty before anyone official knows. They know which children are fed and which aren't, not from any particular surveillance, but from the evidence of the streets, from the rubbish piles and what's in them or not in them, from the sounds in the courts at night and the morning movements that reveal things about the health of the people generating them. This is not power, it's not status, it's not anything that anyone in the comfortable part of the city would recognise as having value. But it's real. It's the knowledge of the ground floor, the knowledge of the streets, the knowledge that comes from being so far below the level of civic notice that you become effectively invisible, and visibility turns out to be a very small part of knowing a place. Winter again. Second winter. The cold comes back and you're more prepared for it this year. The boots are better, replaced in October with a pair you found in a pile in Islington that are only slightly too large and don't need newspaper, just thick socks, and the socks are real socks this year, found in August in a pile outside a house on Rawlings Row, and repaired by hand with thread bought from a market stall. The coat has new patches, more of them, the history of it continuing. Bess's hands are worse. This is the pattern you've been watching, and it's continuing. December is very bad this year, a December of wet cold that gets into everything, and there are 2 weeks in the heart of it when she can barely hold the hook, when her fingers curl inward in the morning until warmth unlocks them, when the pure bucket is too heavy for her grip. You take everything for those 2 weeks, all the routes, the Newington route and your own and the supplements. You come home with enough for both of you. She accepts it without speaking of it as anything other than what it is, a division of labour adjusted for current capacity. In January, she says, on an evening when the room is quiet and both of you are sitting with the fire down to almost nothing, because coal costs too much in January to keep it high. When your time is up, I'll give you the Newington route. This means the year when you're no longer learning but working independently. Not formally apprenticed. There are no formal apprenticeships in this trade, but the implicit period when you're working within Bess's territory and her network and her relationships, when the yield is partly yours and partly hers, and the division is determined by an ongoing calculation that she makes and communicates through what she gives and what she asks. When, you say? Spring, when the weather is better. And after spring? She looks at the fire for a moment. After spring I might be working less, she says, if the hands don't improve. Another pause. I've put some by. Not much. Enough for rent and food if I work the lighter routes. The lighter routes are the ones closest to home, the ones with the least carrying distance, the ones where a good yield can be reached without going far. They produce less than the full routes, but they're manageable for someone whose hands are limiting what they can do. You think about this arrangement, the transfer of it, the way knowledge and route and relationship pass from one person to the next in this trade with no formal mechanism, just the accumulated trust of working together over years. Bess learned her roots from someone. You're learning them from her. Whoever you teach them to will carry them forward another generation. This is how it has always worked. The knowledge of the streets, the knowledge of the tunnels, the knowledge of the prices and the people and the back doors and the timing. It lives in the people who have it, and it transfers person to person in the work itself, in the daily practice of it. The silver watch, JRM, the garnet ring, the tin horse, the 7 copper coins from someone's worst day, the hat from Rawlings Row, the mutton bones from Agnes's kitchen, the oilcloth, the mismatched boot, all of it, everything you've picked and carried and weighed and sold has moved through your hands as part of this vast unacknowledged system. And the system has moved you as well, has made you into someone who knows how it works, and the knowing is the thing of value, more than any individual find, more than any particular morning's yield. Spring, March, the light is coming back. You're on the Newington route alone for the first time, Bess sitting with her hands wrapped in the room, and the morning is one of those early March mornings when the spring isn't yet reliable, but is making promises. The air smells of rain and cold earth, and, briefly, from the direction of a garden behind one of the houses on the better end of the street, something green and new. Your sack is full by 8. The bones have good weight. The rags include a piece of good linen from a kitchen clear out at a house near the church, white and clean and worth something decent at Gottschalk's yard. The pure bucket is full. Agnes handed out a bundle and a piece of canvas and 2 bottles, all without discussion, the transaction of an established relationship. You're carrying the weight of it easily now. Your back has adjusted. Your shoulder has adjusted. The rope handle of the sack sits in the groove it's worn in the muscle above your collarbone, and the groove accepts it like a familiar thing. On the way back to the court, you pass a shop. It's a print shop, the window full of engravings and coloured prints and illustrated papers. One of the prints in the window is a street scene. London Street. Working people, a rag picker visible in the corner of the image, small background carrying a sack over one shoulder, head down, moving through a crowd of more prominently featured figures. You stop and look at it. The rag picker in the print is generic. No face to speak of, just the posture and the sack and the hook, the universal shorthand for the trade. The artist has made the posture accurate, the forward lean, the weight on one side, but the rendering is clean, the coat without patches, the figure without the particular quality that real cold and real weight produce in real people. You look at the print for a minute, then you shift your sack to the other shoulder, adjust the pure bucket in your other hand, and walk on. The city is waking up around you. The market stalls are setting up on the main road. The vendors are calling. The coffee cart has its queue. The crossing sweepers are at work on the main intersection, the familiar back and forth of their brooms on the stones, clearing the night's accumulation to make the crossing passable for people whose shoes cost money. You know all of this. You know who they are and roughly what they earn and where they sleep and what happens to them in winter. You know the names of the carts and the landmarks and the back alleys and the tunnels. You know the voice of the bells that call the hours. St. George's nearest, St. Saviour's a little further, the deep resonance of Southwark Cathedral below all of them, measuring the day in intervals of sound. You know this city the way the city knows itself, from the inside, from the ground up, from the layer of it that the engravings and the newspapers and the novels don't reach. You know it the way the tunnels know it, completely, wetly, with a knowledge that holds all of it, the beautiful and the unbearable, the dome and the sewer, the drawing room and the gutter, in the same unromantic, precise, necessary embrace. The court will be warming today. Bess will have her hands in warm water by now, the morning routine for the bad days, and by afternoon they'll be mobile enough to sort through what you've brought back. The Thursday run to Gottschalk's is 2 days away. The sewer run with Farrow is on the Friday after, if the water levels are right. Life, which is to say the work, which is to say the day, goes on. It's enough. It has to be enough. And in the moments when it isn't, in the moments when the cold is too much and the weight is too much and the smell is too much, and the particular injustice of being the invisible link in a chain that benefits everyone above you, in those moments you go back to the view from the hill in Bermondsey, the dome over the river, the smoke and the light and the whole impossible city, and you hold it and let it be what it is, which is real and yours, in the only way any city belongs to the people who know it best. And now you're here. Wherever here is, wherever you are, it's warm. It's warmer than the court on a November morning, warmer than the sewer tunnel in January, warmer than the Bermondsey Hill in March with the cold still in the ground. Whatever is over you, let it stay over you. You've earned the weight of it, the good weight, the weight that doesn't pull but covers. The morning will come again. It always comes again. November, January, March, November again. The wheel of it going around and the city always there on the other side of whatever morning this will be, already moving, already calling, already full of things that need to be found and carried and sold and returned. But that's the morning. Right now it's not morning. Right now there's just this, the warmth, the dark behind the eyes, the sounds that are very far away and getting further. Somewhere out there the bells are ringing. St. George's nearest, then St. Saviour's, then the deep bell of the cathedral, measuring something, counting something, the interval between one moment and the next. But you don't need to count tonight. You've done your counting. You've done your carrying. You've done the work that the city needs and doesn't thank you for and can't do without. The sack is empty. The bucket is empty. The hook is in the pocket of the coat that hangs on the hook by the door. Your hands are still. The cracks in the knuckles are there, dark in the creases, but still tonight. Warm tonight. Not working tonight. You're warm enough. You're fed enough. You're safe enough. The same as the last night, and the night before, and all the nights stretching backward through the year that made you who you are. The same as all the nights stretching forward into the person you'll become. Let it go. Whatever the day was, let it go. The weight of it, the smell of it, the cold and the dark and the tight spaces and the heavy sack. Let it all go now. Let it fall away the way a sack drops from a shoulder at the end of the day, the way the weight releases, the way the groove in the muscle eases when the pressure is finally off. The sounds of the city fade. Or maybe you're just listening less. The boundary between waking and sleeping moves. It moves toward sleeping. It moves past the place where you can tell the difference. Somewhere in this city, the toshers are out in the dark. Somewhere, the mudlarks are sleeping against the tide. Somewhere, the sorting women at Gottschalk's yard are getting up for another day at the picking table. Somewhere, in 100 years, someone will open a book made from cotton rags that were once a shirt, that were once in a gutter, that were once in a sack exactly like yours, and they'll read something by the light of something clean and bright, and they won't know where the paper came from, and why would they? And there's something all right about that. There's something exactly right about not being seen, about being the deep and invisible working of things, the metabolism, the transformation, the return. All of that goes on, and you rest. Let sleep take you the way the tunnel takes the current, quietly, completely, with the assurance of something that has been doing this for a very long time and knows exactly where it goes. Let the sounds quiet. Let the city quiet. Let the cold quiet. Let the weight of everything you've carried all day finally go. You've earned this. Take it. Good night.